I swear, I always spend way too long thinking about how to start these videos. Well, we're back again with another book review. It's been a very long time since the last one, but today we're going to be reviewing what for me is going to be the last of the Shadowhunter novels until she writes more of them, which I hear she's supposed to in the near future. But if you remember in the last Shadowhunters review that I did, I reviewed the most recently written trilogy, which is The Last Hours, and there's a whole video that you can see for that. Well, this right here isn't the most recently written, however, it is the furthest to present day in the timeline, the Shadowhunters timeline, out of all of her books, I'm fairly certain. So that's why I chose to read them last, because I wanted to know everything that happened beforehand, and really and truly, a lot of things that happen in The Last Hours do connect with a lot of things that happen in this trilogy. And this trilogy is called The Dark Artifices. So basically, this trilogy follows a group of children that are now 5 years older that we meet in the original Mortal Instruments series that takes place in like the late 2000s, like before the 2010s. And I believe this, if I remember right, takes place in the 2010s. So we're 5 years later into the Cold Peace that was instituted by the Shadowhunter leadership, if you will, which basically alienated the entire race, species of the Fae because of their involvement with the enemy in the war that killed a lot of the Shadowhunter population. So this group of children has ties with certain aspects of the Fae, so they're having to navigate this new world in the Cold Peace. And I'm just going to point out something else before we hop into the actual review of it. We finally did it, you guys. We finally got a trilogy in the Shadowhunters universe where all of the books are the same cover and all of the spines make the same image, which I always enjoy when books do that. It's a lot of fun. Yeah, it took me long enough. You've seen the books and the other reviews. It's a little atrocious. Kind of went through a book cover transition as soon as I started the series. So I've got a mix of the old covers and the new covers. So moving on. One thing I can say about this series going in from start to near the end is that you just have this overall sense of dread or doom. Like, you know, or have this strong feeling that something really bad is going to happen. You just don't know 100% what it is yet because we don't know all of the information, and things just keep taking a darker turn as you progress through the series. And you get introduced to new enemies throughout this particular trilogy. So we're, of course, going to begin with Lady Midnight. Now, I'm pretty sure the character portrayed on this cover is Emma, who becomes I would say she's probably the closest thing to the main character, closely associated with another character named Julian. They're parabatai, so they're basically blood brother and sister. But the parabatai bond goes deeper than that. It's a rune that they put on each other that basically allows them to draw on the strength of each other in battle. They can even feel the things that the other is feeling, even pain or injuries, that sort of thing. So we begin this book, Emma's still grappling with the death of her parents from, I believe it was called the Dark War, when Sebastian Morgenstern and his endarkened army tried to take over the world pretty much and destroy everything. So she's grappling with that, but she's also having to grapple with the mystery of it. It's tough for the characters because you come to discover that certain people aren't as trustworthy as you once thought. In this trilogy, you have a book that's known as the Black Volume of the Dead. And it's basically a book about necromancy. So yeah, a lot of things happening at the same time in this trilogy. You have the involvement with the Fae and all the politics of that. You have the necromancy, you have the mystery solving, and then the all-around day-to-day stuff that the Shadowhunters have to do to maintain the peace anyway. So with that, I'm going to hop into the second book of the Dark Artifices, and that is Lord of Shadows. Again, we're taking a darker turn. Let me just say, some things went down in the first book. So now is where we're transitioning into being introduced to some new characters that could be potential enemies or friends. We're not too sure yet. And one of those is the Unseelie King. Now, in the realm, or like the adjacent universe to our world in this sense, the land of the Fae, you have the Seelie Court and the Unseelie Court. And there's a bit of tension between those two. But they just seem to, right from the beginning, label the Unseelie King as a bad guy. Like, there's no real other interpretation of that from what I remember, because it has been a while since I've read these books. So again, here in this book, we're just furthering on the countless different storylines that are happening at the same time with different sets of characters, and how all of those eventually come together towards the end. So I guess you could say it was probably a bit of a slower book until you get towards the end. We finally get more exploration of the Land of the Fae and what that looks like. And let's just say it ain't pretty. Because if you remember what I've said in other book reviews about the Fae, they can be beautiful, they can be terrifying. In the land, it's the same way for their land. Because there's areas where there's quite literal rivers of blood and blight. And that also connects back to the Black Volume of the Dead. We just don't find out those details until later. But, like the Fae, they come in all shapes and sizes. And according to the Shadowhunter lore, the Fae are half angel, half demon. And so that leads to them taking all these different forms. A particular aspect about them is that they cannot lie. However, they use wordplay and the truth in a certain calculated, crafted way in order to trick you into things or to entrap you. So that's yet another thing that our characters are having to navigate through and grapple with, because it's very easy to get trapped in the Land of the Fae from a variety of different reasons, and there's too many to count for me to go into in this one review. But let's just say some really crazy things happen at the end of Book 2 that are a catalyst for what happens in Book 3. And even some character deaths that honestly surprised me and I didn't see coming. Which leads me into Book 3, which is Queen of Air and Darkness. And as you can see, this is probably the thickest Shadowhunters book I've ever seen, without having them all here to compare together, but it just feels like there was so much more put into this book compared to the two before it. Let's just do a little experiment here. So the sum of all the chapters and the epilogue are 870 pages. So that's like Harry Potter level of pages right there for like the later books in that series. But it's in this book that we really start to hop into the multiversal travel and to a place that's very comparable to another dimension they went to in the main series, which was called Edom, where it was a timeline that split off not long before this takes place, where things didn't go as well as they did in the main timeline. But it's in this book that you finally meet the Unseelie King. A lot of things come to a head in this book with the necromancy storyline, the cold peace storyline, and many other things going on in the background with that. At the center of it all, and what is a common theme throughout the whole trilogy, is they explore the aspects of the Parabatai bond and what happens when two Parabatai happen to romantically fall in love, which is, in the Shadowhunter culture, extremely taboo and forbidden and even punishable by being exiled and having your marks stripped off, which is apparently a super painful process, and being exiled to the normal or mundane world. There's a lot of laws in the Shadowhunter culture that people follow because the law is hard, but it is the law, as they say so frequently throughout this trilogy in particular. There isn't always a known reason why that law exists, whether or not it's a good or a bad reason. So a lot of things are questioned in this trilogy. It's in this book in particular that you learn the source of the Parabatai power, the aspects of what happens when two Parabatai fall in love, because it finally progresses to a point of what I would say almost no return. But there again, it's still building towards that sense of doom that the whole trilogy was building from the very beginning. But what I can say is Cassandra Clare does something that she does at the end of all of her trilogies, essentially, to a degree, and that is, by the end of it, she does wrap everything, or at least most everything, up in a nice, neat little bow. And it's, for the most part, a happy ending. Like, you still know that there's something else going on in the background that she can write more about or lead into in another trilogy or whatever. But overall, most of the people in the book series, end up in a pretty good place. And you also have several cameos and involvement from characters in all of the other trilogies that make appearances in this book. And it's nice to see those characters return. But I can definitely say the end state of the romantic love in the Parabatai bond, I didn't see it coming in the exact form that it did, but it was definitely fascinating to say the least. So I'll close with, it took me about a year to finally read the third book and finish this trilogy after reading the first two books. And it was kind of bittersweet. Like maybe I was just putting it off because I didn't want the story to be over. Because like I said, I kind of went out of publication order and went through more so in chronological order to a degree. And so this right here, like I said, is the last book I've read in the series until she writes more. So it was kind of bittersweet finishing the book because at this moment there's no more books for me to read. Going forward from here, from what I gather, there's a book. I don't understand the exact situation of it, if it's going to be published into an actual book or if it's still in an online form, not Kindle, mind you, but an online form that's still accessible, or what's going to happen with that. But it's called Secrets of Blackthorn Hall, which has something to do with what happens in this trilogy and the last hours and a couple of other things. Yeah, there again, don't know the situation with that. I did see a rumor that there's potential for a final trilogy to be written that's supposed to be the final conflict and end of story for the entire sum of all the Shadowhunter books. And I believe that trilogy is going to be called The Wicked Powers. And I'm curious if it's going to have something to do with not only what happens at the end of this book, which is, to my knowledge, the furthest forward in the timeline, but I wonder if it's going to have anything to do with we'll call it the post-credit scene at the end of The Lost Book of the White, which is in the Eldest Curses 2-book series, which primarily follow Alec and Magnus, where you have a lot of the greater demons, the princes of hell, meeting together, formulating a plan on something that they're about to do and work together, finally, for once, or something like that. So, a lot of interesting and diabolical things happening in the background that haven't been expanded upon or explored yet. So I'm wondering if the new trilogy will have something to do with that. I mean, The Wicked Powers just sounds like something that would have to do with all the princes of hell. But enough of that. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope I didn't ramble on too much. I hope it was the right level of informative. And I strongly recommend not just this trilogy, but the entire series of the Shadowhunters novels, because they really are a well-written story. And I just love how you have characters even from a century ago reappearing in different ways throughout the timeline because they're immortal to a degree. Like I said, I enjoy just how well fleshed out this universe is. Like, I've often compared this series to the Harry Potter series and the way J.K. Rowling added so much depth and description to her world. Cassandra Clare is doing the same thing with hers. Like, there is so much to explore, so much lore. Like, you really can get lost in all of it. So yeah, highly recommend. Check these books out. Again, it's called the Dark Artifices trilogy of the Shadowhunter novels. And that's Lady Midnight, Lord of Shadows, and Queen of Air and Darkness. But if I were to pick a favorite out of these three, it would definitely be Queen of Air and Darkness for sure. If I were to rank all of the trilogies together, my top would probably be the 6-book, it's 2 different trilogies, but the 6-book Mortal Instruments series. A close second would be the Infernal Devices, because that was the one I started with. It introduced me to this world, and I think it'll have a special place in my heart because of that reason alone, not just because of the beloved characters that I met in that series that reappear throughout the timeline. But third would definitely be the Dark Artifices, and that's not to undersell how good of a trilogy that it is. But my least favorite, again, not to undersell it, would be The Last Hours. But as I explained in the Last Hours trilogy, that one felt like it didn't have as much to it as the other trilogies. I mean, it is the most recently written one, so she might be, kind of fizzling out a little bit on how many different things she can put into a story. But I don't know, so don't take my word for it. Read it for yourself and see how you like it, because I'm sure other people like it more than other trilogies. But I explained in that video, like, some of the gripes that I had with it. But that's enough of that. Again, highly recommend. Check it out. And I'll catch you guys in the next book review. See you next time.